A deal on Dickens, who could resist? A stack of Austen, warmly kissed. Golden Age crime tales twist and turn, every page a treasure to learn. Books keep coming home with me, piles so tall they're all I see. Turn a page and sail the sea, reading always feels so free.
Hi, my name is Talia. Welcome to Talia Nerds Out. I decided that I needed to, I saw a book tag that came up from Andrew at, I believe his channel's You Could Be Reading More. And he did a book tag called Nonfiction November Tag. Sorry, stirring my tea. I'm having, I believe it's called Boulder Breakfast from Tea Spot. Anyway, oh, this is so good. So one of my house mouse designs mugs. I love their mugs. I love their stamps too. They're just awesome. Anyway, distractible much. So he did a Nonfiction November tag for Nonfiction November. I guess, duh. It was a tag created by Julie at Bookish Travels. And as someone who usually, outside of mysteries, my usual fare is history that I read. Haven't been finishing a lot of that lately, but it's because I've been having a lot of larger history books that I've been reading and have been pretty unfocused. But I'm going to be doing this while apparently getting my knitting stuck in my brace. There we go. Well, hopefully getting a little bit of knitting done on my mom's socks that have been in the works forever. Finally finished picking up the stitches for the gusset. So now I'm just doing gusset decreases. So here's the first sock. Anyway. She dyed the yarn, by the way. This is one of her Christmas colorways. Came without packages. I'm so distractible today. Okay, so the prompts for the Nonfiction November tag. I think I purl and then just knit. Let me take a quick look. Yeah, I purl to the marker and then knit. So, these are the prompts. What motivated you to pick up your first nonfiction book, and can you remember it? First nonfiction book that I would have read, period, like including school, or would have been first nonfiction book that I would have chosen to read. Because if it's school related, I don't remember. Non-school related, probably, I can't remember the exact book, but I can tell you it's probably a book on snakes. Because when I was, oh gosh, I was somewhere between, I was probably like in the 7 to 9-ish age range when I got really, really into snakes. My sister was into dogs and cats, so she'd pick up books about them, but I would pick up books about snakes, about, just them and their lives, like what they looked like, their characteristics, but also, even though I knew I would never own a snake, I'd pick up books on how to care for snakes. Like, some of that knowledge is still knocking around in here, but, oh yeah, I was super into snakes, and those are probably some of my first nonfiction books that I chose to read. Other than that, they were probably baseball books, because once we moved back to the States, I got really into baseball. I was lucky that when we first came to States, my dad's team, he's a Cleveland guy, and our Cleveland Indians went to the World Series, so that was 97. Great year to be a Cleveland fan, especially a new Cleveland fan. I was about, I guess in 97, I would have been 10. So it was a great year to come into baseball. And I just devoured everything baseball, books about baseball, all that sort of thing. So after snakes, that would have been my next thing when I was about 10 that I really remember getting into reading wise. And that would have even been like baseball history as well. So those are probably my first chosen history books now that I think about it. Anyway, and what motivated me to read those books? So I explained the baseball thing. But for the snakes, I just liked them, I think, because no one else liked snakes. One of my most excited days in the library, I remember, we were in I forgot I had an alarm that was going to go off. Anyway, we were we lived in an Air Force base in England, and at that time, and I remember one of my happiest days, because I was, like I said, into snakes, is when they brought this big old, as I recall, it was a python. He was huge. We have pictures of it, of him slithering over all the kids' legs. I look in the pictures like I am so excited. Varying levels of expressions on the other kids' faces, but I look like you just gave me like the biggest like candy bar or something. I was so excited in these pictures. So it wasn't even just merely oh, nobody else likes them, so I'm gonna like them. Like, maybe it started out that way, but I got really into them. Like, I was so psyched that I was having a snake slither on my legs. And like I said, it was a big snake. If I can find the pictures, I'll try to throw one up here, but I don't actually have access to them as far as I know. Because, I mean, that was eons ago. That's, gosh, it's over, it's almost 30 years ago. Not quite 30 years ago. I don't know. Anyway. So, yeah, I think initially it was because, oh, my sister's into cats and dogs. Snakes are kind of cool. Let me get into that. And then it became a genuine interest where I was super excited and interested in them. Okay. Number 2. How do you choose your next nonfiction read? Well, I use Historathon to help me kind of keep like a general era. But so like I will try to make my reads match up with Historathon, but if I'm really feeling like, oh hey, I want to do a readathon about this book, like that's outside of the Historathon's current era, I will do that because I feel like it. Or if I'm in the middle of, if there's like some other readathon, or so if I'm doing a buddy read or a readathon, that'll also help me choose a book. If it's Historathon, that kind of thing. Sometimes I'll just like get a new book and then I'll start flipping through it and then I'll get sucked in and then I'll start reading it because I might as well at this point. That happened, first of all, with a magician. I think it's called A Magician and the Spirits. It's a book by Harry Houdini and his exposure of the charlatan mediums of his day. That was earlier this year. Now, I managed not to knock it over. Fairly recently, the other one that I did that to was Hard to Break. This was a recent purchase. Why Our Brains Make Habits Stick. And this was one that I got, I want to say it was during a 70% off Princeton press sale. And I started reading it. It actually is quite an easy read. I need to pick it up again. But I started reading and then I was like, oh, I might as well continue. So that happens to me sometimes where I'll start and then like, well, I've gotten this far anyway. Do you take notes? So number 3, do you take notes or annotate your nonfiction books? 100%. So I'm actually going to use this as examples because I have it here. All of my current read nonfiction books actually have these attached to it. So it's like a little magnetic bookmark, but it has an area that I can hold, either a pen or a highlighter. So all of them hold highlighters. And I always have pens at my desk. And I also, on the front of all my books, I have the color tabs that I want to use, so that I can just turn my page to the front of the book, grab my tab, and tab it. And then I can take notes and highlight as I choose. Now, that does mean that every subsequent read is going to have the marks of my last read, which we'll see if I'll have to see how much I regret that in years to come. But I feel like I absorb better when I'm highlighting. Whether or not that's true is another thing. Now, I didn't do it in this book thus far, but I've had points where I've made comments in the margins, that kind of thing. Now, it is an unfortunate thing if I end up not liking a book and then want to destash it, because then the book has all my writing in it. So that is something that is probably a poor, a sad side effect of my annotating process. But yes, I very much take note and annotate in my nonfiction books. Or I do take notes occasionally, but I mostly annotate in my nonfiction books. I've registered that with a take notes or annotate. Anyway, number 5. How do you feel about the intersection of... Oh, I'm sorry, skip number 4. Number 4, have you read a nonfiction book that has challenged your beliefs and assumptions? Whoops. I feel like I was going to fall off. Trying to think if I've done one of those recently. I'm sure I have read one. It's not immediately coming to mind. Yeah, I would have to think about that one a bit more, because as much nonfiction as I've read, you would think that I have had something like that, but I do tend to read mostly. I read a lot of medieval history. I read a lot of era history. It's not like I read like a lot of philosophy books or anything like that. Sorry, my other set of needles is getting stuck in my braces. I read mostly history, and occasional forays into science. So not a lot of what I read is like philosophy or something. I mean, I'll read religion books, but they are, Catholic in nature. So I can't say off the top of my head what books I've read that have challenged current beliefs, challenged beliefs or assumptions. Maybe some of the books that I read regarding the Medjugorje apparitions and some of their effects, but that's the only thing I can think of off the top of my head. 5, how do you feel about the intersection of storytelling and factual content in nonfiction? I really feel like if you are going to write a, sorry, just double checking something with my knitting. Yeah, okay. If you're going to write a nonfiction book, write a nonfiction book. If you're going to write a fiction book, write a fiction book. Yes, there's a natural story in all of history, and there are ways to tell it to not make it dry. But I don't want it to be like a made up, like, don't write it like it's a historical fiction. If I wanted historical fiction, I'd read historical fiction. So don't tell me, unless you have documentation to back it up, what the look in their eyes was or what was going through their heads. If you don't have that documentation, if you weren't there, don't tell that to me, because that's your headcanon or that is your fan fiction. If I want to read historical fiction, that's what I'll read. I purposely choose to read nonfiction because I don't like historical fiction particularly poor historical fiction, confusing, like muddling my head up with what's real and what's not. I want to know that what I'm reading is factual. I really am very picky about my historical fiction. And so I get really peeved when my historical books get infiltrated by bad historical fiction writing styles. So there's a reason why I am probably going to be destashing the first book I started on Clara Barton this year. I can't remember the name of it. It's over there. And I'll knock books over if I get to it. So instead, I started A Quiet Will. Oh, actually, like, my planner will tell me what the name of the other Clara Barton book is that I'm getting rid of, most likely. So the other Clara Barton book is A Woman of Valor, which I was really excited about, but it ended up being a big disappointment to me because, first of all, I felt like it actually missed all the interesting stories about her in her life before Washington. I felt like it actually kind of did her dirty in that way. So it missed all the interesting stories, and then it overemphasized how she looked, the expression in her eyes, the things that we have no reason to believe that they took from actual documentation. So it was consistently irritating me because it felt like historical fiction fluff that wasn't helping me with the actual history, and it was an annoyance. He should have just written a historical fiction book, but maybe he didn't have the talent for that. I mean, sorry, that was rude. But this is the one that I ended up picking up instead, and I enjoy it more. I haven't picked it up in a while just because I've been focusing a bit more on some of my fictional reads. But A Quiet Will, The Life of Clara Barton. This is written by, I want to say he's a great nephew. So he actually, first of all, he knew Clara. So I know that even when he doesn't cite sources, I know that some of his knowledge is actually personal knowledge because this was a family member. This is someone he knew, someone that there are probably family stories about. But he also quotes her letters, her journals. And actually, that's part of why I picked this up, is one of the complaints from people was that it was all this stuff with her letters. I'm like, that's what I want. I want facts. I want something that can be backed up. Give me something real. Give me something to hold on to. Don't give me your little floofy headcanon that if I wanted to read it as a nonfiction, I would have done it. Or read it as a historical fiction, I would have done it. So now my one complaint about this book is formatting. It's not very well formatted. Sometimes it's a bit hard to tell when he's moved into the journal or the letter and moved back to the narrative voice. But honestly, it's easy enough to adjust to, and it's actually, I feel like I know Clara better because of this, because he draws a very clear picture of her while not creating historical fiction. So the other author really fumbled the ball by not touching more on Clara's pre-Washington life and focusing more on the color of her hair and the look in her eye and blah, 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 blah. Bull honky. Waste of time. The other book, not this one. I know that other book might be some people's cup of tea. Not mine. Give me real history. Anyway, but I could go on forever about the intersection of storytelling and factual content in nonfiction. I know that there is a place for the storytelling aspect, particularly when you're dealing with children. You need to pull children in more with the storytelling. I also know that maybe people who aren't really big into reading nonfiction, that might be their first stair step into reading history, but part of it is I don't like things to be dressed up with fiction when it should be nonfiction, but also if the author takes too many liberties, I begin to wonder where their narrative creativity ends and where fact begins, which I don't like to have to, sit there and play, is this fiction or nonfiction? Or to quote Hunger Games, real or not real? But I do acknowledge that there is a purpose and where it can be useful. I just think that sometimes when I read in comment sections where people complain, oh, this is dry, this is, basically this, when they're complaining that it's not reading like a fiction book, essentially, I'm like, well, maybe you should read a historical fiction. Maybe you're in the wrong place if you expect all history books to read like historical fiction. Like, that's not how, we don't have that kind of documentation for everything. A good story can be told, and a good author can, without embellishing, make a historical era and a historical person seem interesting while still not deviating from what is actually known, or making it clear when he is hypothesizing versus, or even make it clear when what he's saying might not be, something that's based in absolute fact. But anyway, 6, is there a topic you wish authors would explore? I should have thought about this more before I started this video, because I knew that this was one of the prompts. A specific topic that I wish authors would explore more. There's so many books out there that okay, I had to think about it a little bit. I guess a couple of things I can think of where I've had to do a lot of searching, and when I've found it, I've either been either it's been out of my price range, or I've had to put out a little bit more money for it, are books about specific aspects of like church history. So like things about, I really had to search hard to find books on the historical practices of Lent, so like some of the traditions around Lent. It was really hard for me to find books on that. I think I found like 1 or 2 if I include the one I found about the history of the Way of the Cross prayers, also known as the Stations of the Cross. The other one that I had to look very hard for, again, falls in that area of church practice. This was the only book that I could find. I wanted to find a book about the history of the liturgy of the hours. And I assumed it would cover things like the Book of Hours that was lay people's book, but not quite the same as what would be in monastic tradition. Because I've gotten like little bits and pieces here and there, from different books that I've been reading about liturgy of the hours, because I've been really steeping myself in trying to really get into really steep myself into that prayer type. So like learning about what their intention was when they put together which psalms they chose, the canticles that they put together to create this this scriptural based prayer that's supposed to be available to pray multiple hours a day, and within the monasteries are prayed. Let's see, you have the 3 daytime prayers they will pray, You have morning prayer, evening prayer, office of readings, night prayer. And they used to have, I think, 1 or 2 more hours before they streamlined things a little bit. But I've been really learning as much as I can about the liturgy of the hours, and I have a few other books I want to read, but I wanted something more history focused. It was really hard to find something. This is the only thing I was able to find. The liturgy of the hours in East and West, the origins of the divine office and its meaning for today. I wish that there are more books on this topic, on not just the current liturgy of the hours and how that got to be formed, but also the history of it, the historical context, it's how it's developed over the years. That's what I've really been wanting, and that's been hard for me to find. As far as I know, this is the only book that is easily accessible. There might be things in other languages. It was really hard for me to find this one. I really hope to read this soon. It talks about it, monastic office in the West, Eastern urban monastic office, cathedral vigils in the West. Cathedral hours in the West, monastic hours in Italy, pre-Constantinian church. So the Byzantine office, the Coptic office, Ethiopian rite, Syro-Chaldean office, Armenian. So this was what I was looking for, but like I said, there's only the one book. I wish that there was more on some of the history behind prayers. I know that there's one out there about one pope and the creation of the St. Michael the Archangel prayer. These are the kind, I want the richness of, because there's so much richness in church history, and it goes back for so many years, that those are the books that I feel like there's not quite enough of, the history of all that, the historical richness of all that. There's plenty out there about, like, touching on the edges of the historical for some of these prayers, but it's just not fully getting in there to the extent that I want to. So maybe I just haven't found the books yet, but that's what I want. 7, do you incorporate insights from nonfiction into your daily life? I think that I do to certain, well, of course, my religious readings, which would include Liturgy of the Hours. I live stream Liturgy of the Hours 2 times a day, Office of Morning Prayer and Office of Evening Prayer. And so when I'm reading books about that, I am taking that in and letting it make that prayer time become richer. And so that very much influences that for me. Other than that, I know that you can't help but, and this is one of my biggest things about why I feel like it's so important to put quality books out there, because you are what you eat, essentially. If you're taking in books, you can't help but have it influence you. It's the same thing with television. It's the same thing with the people that you're around. We're all formed by what we take in our surroundings, in our entertainment, in our education. So I can't help but have what I read influence how I present to the world, how I think, how I move. So whether it's in a positive way or a negative way. So the most obvious thing is, of course, the religious readings. But I know that other things that I read subconsciously have affected things that I do or the way I think, even if I'm not completely aware of it, because that's how it works if you're truly engaging with what you're reading. Even if it's a piece of fiction, it's teaching you to see through, even if it's not intending to, it's teaching you to see through another person, albeit a fictional person's point of view, or I guess technically the author's point of view. Although, authors don't always write from their particular viewpoint. But anyway, you're looking through another character's eyes, through a character's eyes. So you absorb that's if you're really engaging with the fiction, I feel that you take on aspects of it, even if it's to a greater or lesser extent, depending on what you're reading. So, yeah, I do incorporate insights from nonfiction in my daily life, particularly the religious things, but I know other things as well, even if I'm not always aware of how I am influenced by it. Choose just one book from your nonfiction collection to highlight. Oh, good heavens. What shall I choose? I guess I should stick to something near me because I'm not getting up. So what shall I choose to highlight? Let me pause you a second. All right, guys, this was a really hard choice, but I ended up going with 3 instead of 2. And I chose not to go with something I'm currently reading, just to narrow things down a bit. So the first one that I wanted to mention was When Books Went to War, the stories that helped us win World War II. This one, a lot of times if I read a book on Kindle and then I can't get it out of my head, I end up picking it up. And this was one of those books. And yeah, this covers the reaction to the way that the book publishing companies banded together to support our troops in World War II, and how part of it was a reaction to the book burnings by Nazi Germany. And part of it was, like I said, a support of the troops themselves. So how the paperbacks were really were given a jump start with World War II, because they needed to have paperbacks that could fit in a pocket of a soldier's, in their breast pocket or in their back pocket or whatever, while they were in war. And there's pictures in here of guys in the trenches, literally, reading while waiting to, either move to the next trench or waiting for I'm trying to find some of the pictures. So this guy's not actually we might not have one where they're actually in the trenches in here, or at least I can find easily. But here is one of the guys. It says, on LSTs, the stress of being in imminent battle could be suffocating. Books were a godsend when it came to distraction. So here's a guy sitting there reading. Stories about how a guy might read part of the book and then realize that his buddy was looking for another book to read. So he's like, well, I read the first half. Here, tears the book. Here's the first half. I need to finish the second one. Search me out when you're ready for the second one. Oh, well, this is interesting. I didn't notice this. So Appendix A has banned authors, 10,000 whose books were banned in Germany and all German-occupied countries during World War II. First on the list is Ernest Hemingway, by the way. So that's even interesting. I didn't even see that because I read this initially on Kindle. I had looked through the Armed Services editions of books to try to get ideas of more things to read, but I hadn't noticed some of the banned authors. Karl Marx. That makes sense for. Oh, that's interesting. I was going to make sense for Germany because communists in Germany. Helen Keller is on the list. Emile Zola, Trotsky. Who else I recognize on this list? Ernest Bloch. A lot of German names here. Jung. And I mean the psychologist C.G. Jung. G.K. Chesterton. That was one interesting thing that I found from Tolkien's book when they wanted to do a German edition of, I want to say it's The Hobbit, and they asked him if, basically they referenced some of the Germanic origins of the traditions for Tolkien and made some sort of comment about any Jewish influences, and Tolkien essentially is like, that's, I'm, basically proud of the influences of Jewish of the Jewish religion on what eventually became Christianity. And basically he told the Germans that he had no issues with the Jews, and he was very offended that they thought that he might be on their same wavelength. So I thought that was interesting. I actually want to see if he's on the list, because he didn't no, he didn't make the list. So I was wondering if maybe because he didn't espouse their beliefs, if he got put on their list, but I guess not. Okay, Sigmund Freud, Jack London. That's interesting. How does Jack London keep getting on these banned book lists? Winston Churchill. I'm not shocked for that one. Anyway, so this wasn't to become a banned book thing. I just actually didn't realize that this was in the back of the book for the appendices. So if you ever wanted to know what Nazi Germany considered to be subversive authors, they are here. Helen Keller really caught me by surprise, but I guess with the anti-disability ness in Nazi Germany, I shouldn't have been shocked. Anyway, another book I want to highlight is John Adams Under Fire by Dan Abrams and David Fisher. Founding Fathers Fight for Justice in the Boston Massacre Murder Trial. I could not get this book out of my head. I read it as a library Kindle book, and over a year or so, it just kept kicking around in my head. It really made me a John Adams fan. I just couldn't, I kept thinking about it, kind of like what happened with when books went to war. And I was like, obviously I need to have this book. I've been thinking about it for over a year, like probably more than that. It just couldn't get it out of my head. I love the fact that he stood up for the justice system, even when ideologies would have made it preferable for him to not do so, even when people on his side wanted him to not represent the British, when no one else wanted to, when the soldiers involved with the Boston Massacre, when everyone else is like, nah, not gonna be legal representation for them. And Adam's like, look, we need to have now at the beginning, we need to set a standard that everyone gets to have representation and a free trial. And he had people like Samuel Adams coming up against him. He was not widely supported in his stance on this, and yet he stood firm. Greatest respect for John Adams. Nothing's really changed my opinion of him that much. I just think that he was a very, he stood on his convictions. He just didn't say it. He actually acted upon his convictions. And he tried to be nonpartisan, which actually was what his son would try to be as well. And both he and John Quincy ran into issues because of their attempts to do what was right, not always to do what their party was going for, or what those on their side of the conflict were going for. And then the final book I want to highlight is Eamon Duffy's Marking the Hours, English People and Their Prayers. And this just started the whetting of my appetite for give me more history of our prayers. Give me more of this. Besides beautiful artwork, it just touched on a desire that I have to just understand more about the prayer life during this era, during the early times of the church, during, I guess this wouldn't technically be early, this is because early would be, ancient, but, during a time quite a bit before our own. And not only the prayers of the monastics, although that's very important to know as well, but also the prayers of the common people. And Eamon Duffy is also the author of the book that I'm currently reading, which is The Stripping of the Altars, which is a big old chunker, and I'm probably going to be reading that one for a while. But anyway, I couldn't choose just one to highlight, but I did limit myself to 3. I will tag people below. I should be getting off because actually I'm going to be streaming Liturgy of the Hours pretty soon. So thank you very much for joining me. I really enjoyed this tag. I need to get a little bit more nonfiction read this particular month. I've been reading nonfiction. It's just that all my books are like in progress, thicker books that I'm currently reading. So I'm not getting a lot of finished reads that are nonfiction, even if I am reading nonfiction. But anyway, thank you very much, Andrew, for doing this tag so that I could see it. And thank you, Julie from Bookish Travels, for creating this tag. Alrighty. Really enjoyed this. I'll see y'all the next time. God bless. Bye-bye.
Books keep coming home with me. Piles so tall, they're all I see. Turn a page and sail the sea. Reading always feels so free.